we're going to get the world that we live in. And ultimately, I think the current paradigm is, the byproduct of the fear-based ego, to get into the psychological aspects of it. And so the fear-based ego, driven by short-sighted greed, is what's destroying us. And I think ultimately the way out is, as spiritual as this may sound, is for people to, stop buying into all the fear-based propaganda and start doing what they love, take bold and courageous action without fear, in whatever direction you are most passionate about. And once we get a critical mass of people to do that, we will be able to break out of this. And it's happening. I mean, look, it's in unprecedented fashion. People are rising up, primarily thanks to the internet, because the internet gives you your way around that corporate propaganda of television and radio. But people are rising up in unprecedented fashion, and things will change, but it's just a matter of how soon will that happen, and how many people have to die before that happens.
Yeah, I mean, to get past fear, like you said, you turn on the mainstream media and you're supposed to be afraid. Aren't we bad Americans if we're not afraid?
Right, exactly, Lee. I mean, look, the divide and conquer and fear propaganda is scaring me badly, because, and it's making me fearful. How about that? But if you look at it, the economy is only working for 25% of the population, and that number is going to decrease. So what's happening in Ferguson and Baltimore, I mean, that's just the first little wave of an incoming tsunami. Obviously, people are so buried in debt, they lose all hope, and rioting is going to happen. And you couple that with the militarized police state. I mean, look, the central bankers who run this planet, I mean, they know that people are going to rebel. I mean, that's why they've been shifting money from, public housing and pouring it into prisons and militarizing the police force. I mean, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they've made their intentions very clear. They're saying we're all for the aristocratic paradigm and we're for the violent suppression of the poor. I mean, that's just a fact. And, break through the propaganda and it's common sense. So, I mean, I don't know where you want to go with that one if you have a dildo joke to throw in. But
that might lighten it up a little.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Democrats and the Republicans. The UK just had some kind of little election thing. I think they voted for David Cameron to be their Duke of Boysenberry or whatever the hell it is. So great things going over there with democracy, right?
Yeah, wonderful. But look, I think electoral politics is a spectacle for the mentally enslaved. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, it's all about. See, I'm focusing effort. Once I'm just about finished up with this book, and then I'm going to go back to an activism angle. I don't think protest is a be-all end-all, but it's certainly a way to focus mass consciousness and to break through the gates of corporate media by taking part in protests and rallies. But with all the divide and conquer stuff happening, I think it's important that we get the focus away from, two-party oligarchy and electoral charades and put it back on the central banks. So on June 20th, there's going to be a massive protest at the Bank of England, the Central Bank of England. And I'm trying to get some protests going in the United States at all the Federal Reserve branches.
So explain to people that don't get it. Why is central banking a problem?
I mean, because, politics is some kind of weird circus sideshow. I mean, look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve just prints up trillions of dollars and they pump it into the stock market. So their primary dealers, as they're called, will just make huge profits. I mean, anyone who thinks that we don't have money to solve our societal problems, I mean, just look at the financial crisis. When Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and the other big six banks got caught in trillions of dollars of fraudulent activity, they just printed up a couple $1 trillion and gave it to themselves. I mean, through quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve and the central bankers come up with these really obtuse propaganda, confusing sounding terms like quantitative easing. But really what quantitative easing is they printed up $4 trillion in the US alone, a little over 7 trillion globally, and they gave it to themselves. And it's just so absurd. I mean, once you understand how much wealth there is and how, central bankers just click a button and invent billions and trillions of dollars, everything else is utter bullshit. I'm sorry. I mean, listening to Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush and what is that? God, I appreciate Bernie Sanders, but why is he running as a Democrat? The Democrats are so sold up the river. That's frustrating to me.
Well, and what else is frustrating is I think he's already said that if he doesn't win the primary, he will put his support behind Hillary. So he's kind of already pivoting to give that support to Hillary.
I like a lot of what Bernie says, but strategically, he's like the useful idiot right now. I don't nothing against him personally. I like the guy, but it's just so unfortunate. So we have to focus. We have to overcome this liberal versus conservative, Republican, Democrat, red state, blue state. We have to overcome that, and the way to do it is to focus on the central banks. That's where the real power is. Everything else is a charade, man. It's a puppet theater. It's the banks. They create trillions of dollars. The Federal Reserve could sneeze and end global poverty. That's just a fact. It's ridiculous. If you took 10% of the richest 500 corporations' annual profits, you could wipe out global hunger and poverty. And as you mentioned, the research I did on the military, only 20% of military spending in the United States alone would wipe out global hunger and poverty. So once you understand how much wealth there is, you'll understand that electoral politics is a complete joke and distraction.
Right.
That's my ultimate point. We got to focus on the central banks.
Yeah.
June 20th, Lee, go to the Federal Reserve in D.C. Raise some hell, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no. When you think about what's best for national security, spending that 20% to end world hunger and poverty, all of a sudden we'd be loved around the world. I don't think
they're not interested in national security, Lee. They're just interested in war profiteering. These private military companies make billions of dollars. And with 1% of that profit, you know what they do? They arm and fund ISIS. That's what they do. They keep the military machine turning, man. That's the way it works. It's all war profiteers. Come on, imagine you're like living in the desert. You're living hand to mouth. All of a sudden, planes come in, reduce your city to rubble. Your family members are dead. And all of a sudden, in comes, private military companies giving you weapons. What the hell are you going to do? It's ridiculous.
Right.
They don't give a shit about our security. Come on.
Right, and the funding both sides. One good example I always like to give was I don't know if this program still goes on, but we were paying the Taliban millions of dollars to let our trucks through a route in the mountains so that we could fight the Taliban. So we were paying them to fight them, which is kind of our standard procedure.
This is exactly. It's standard procedure. If you look at what happened in Iraq, we armed and funded this big police force, and then we fired all the policemen and let them keep their weapons. It was all about creating sectarian conflict in Iraq. These people laugh all the way to the bank, and we have people who are well-meaning, thinking like, I should probably support Hillary Clinton because Jeb Bush will be so much worse. No, that's not the way to go. The whole lesser of two evil thing is it drives me mad because I know the central bankers are laughing all the way to the bank. Hillary Clinton's been hanging out with Lloyd Blankfein,
Yeah, there's photos.
Come on. It's just, and Goldman Sachs made Obama's campaign viable. The early money into Obama's campaign was Goldman Sachs.
Right. I like to.
The bankers laugh all the way to their own bank. It's ridiculous.
I like to point, when people try and say they're that different, I like to point to, or they also like to say that, Obama hasn't achieved enough because the Republicans stopped him in Congress. I like to point to, well, look at the things that Obama could do without any Republicans. He surrounded himself with the big bank people. He surrounded himself with Citibank and Goldman Sachs and Chase. Those were his economic advisors. He had the support of Robert Rubin from his Chicago Senate days, you know, former treasurer of the secretary. I mean, secretary of the treasury.
Obama's first move was to bring on Geithner, and Geithner and Paulson were like the, evil twins of the greatest theft of wealth in history. I mean, once he made that first move, I started criticizing Obama like crazy, and all my progressive friends were like, "What's your problem, man?" It's like, no, like, I'm sorry. Once you understand the economic situation, all that other stuff is bullshit. I'm sorry, man. I mean, again, the Federal Reserve can sneeze and wipe out poverty. I mean, it makes no economic sense whatsoever. And for a politician to stand up there and not say that, they're a sellout. They're a propagandized puppet, or they're a sellout. That's just the facts of the matter. It's a mathematical fact.
So how do you end up with a system where there's 3 times as many empty and foreclosed on homes around the U.S. as there are homeless people? How do you end up with that?
It's just straight up short-sighted greed. I think in the grand scheme of things, as you pointed out in your 2 episodes ago, Redacted Tonight, in the grand scheme of things, poverty exists to keep us in line. Whether you're in poverty or you fear poverty, it exists to keep us in line. That's the only reason why it's there. I mean, this is the aristocratic paradigm. We are led by short-sighted greed. I mean, that's ultimately what I have to say, I guess.